Hi, I'm Dave, and I talk too much. You've been warned. On August 12th, 2020, a little video was uploaded to the Netflix Film Club YouTube channel titled Why the Matrix is a Trans Story, according to Lily Wachowski. Lily is of course one half of the Wachowski siblings who together co-wrote and co-directed the Matrix films. In the brief 4.5 minute video, she discusses her views on the transgender reading of the first film released back in 1999, regarded as a seminal science fiction action classic, and side note, it's my favorite film. I was young and impressionable when I first saw it, and it was pretty much the gateway drug that got me obsessed with movies and filmmaking. The YouTube video is a simple little webcam interview. It's a bit over-edited and rambly and is broken into 4 short sections, separated by text screens. We never actually hear the questions or prompts given to Lily, so the full context of her answers is a bit tricky to glean. To those already familiar, the trans reading of the film wasn't anything new. After Lana Wachowski came out as transgender back in 2010, some of the more perceptive viewers noticed the interesting trans subtext and shared their interpretations online through articles and videos. Many of these viewers happen to be trans people themselves who were able to look beneath the surface level narrative and connect to the film on a thematically queer wavelength. However, to all those unaware of the trans reading, this video, uploaded out of the blue by Netflix and the surrounding online journalism about it, was probably their first introduction to the idea. But due to much of the journalism oversimplifying Lily's words, a large group of people came to misinterpret the video as her proclaiming that the Matrix film was made with the explicit and sole intention of being a transgender allegory. Lots of people were also quick to dismiss the reading as a shallow attempt to retroactively make the film appear more progressive and woke. You know, knee-jerk assumptions that this was more J.K. Rowling style revisionism.
My take is I think it's complete bullshit.
And they're just trying to add it.
Yeah, you add just another layer.
It's like the J.K. Rowling shit.
I don't know. This feels like to me like the J.K. Rowling stuff. The authorial intent is drastically changing.
It's about being transgender the whole time, just like how Hermione was black the whole time.
Additionally, people also accused it as being maybe a promotional tactic to advertise the Matrix 4 sequel, which Lily isn't even co-directing, by the way, and which was originally scheduled for 2022, now set for the end of 2021.
You know what they announced recently?
There's a
Matrix 4.
Yeah.
So this would be good PR for that movie, and would get you back in the headlines.
So damn cynical and lazy. It's just people churning out quick reaction content for views. There's no deeper dive into context, no familiarity with Wachowski's body of work, and no genuine effort to actually explore or understand the trans reading.
The Matrix is not a story of like self-exploration. Like it's not just be yourself. That's not the message of the Matrix.
You know what that means? It's Latin. Means know thyself.
Says it's actually about transgender people. Crazy because no one has ever thought that about the Matrix ever.
They really haven't bothered to do any of their homework before jumping in front of cameras and microphones to rant so confidently and so ignorantly. Most of these pundits seem to have only skimmed the YouTube video, or read some excerpts and scrolled past some headlines. Hell, a lot of them haven't even seen the film in years and are just relying on their vague memories.
So they have come out now and said that the Matrix was actually intended to be a trans allegory. Now, I haven't seen the Matrix in a while, but I feel like that's not the impression I got from the movies, like at all. It's not that old. I think they came out in the 90s, right? Or maybe even more.
It might have been.
recent.
It might have been at the turn of the millennia. I think it was over that period.
Yeah.
anyways.
It's pretty frustrating. How does this by anyone's standard equate to a carefully thought out and well-researched argument? They're just echo chambers of biased and ill-informed opinions, with the occasional little sprinkle of transphobia too, of course.
Is it still red pilled? Or is that the pill they take when you find out you slept with a trans person? That's what the pill is.
It's just a worthless heap of shallow reactionary content. Lily and Lana have never claimed that The Matrix was specifically made as a direct allegory for the transgender experience. In the YouTube video, Lily acknowledges the trans reading and expresses her joy that it exists and that it has struck a meaningful chord for trans audiences, but she never once uses the word allegory in the video. Now, let me be clear, the film is absolutely filled with interesting symbolic trans subtext, but by Lily's own admission, even she doesn't know how intentional these were.
I don't know how present my transness was in the background of my brain as we were writing it, but it all came from the same sort of fire that I'm talking about.
And just to hammer it home, here's Lily speaking in the Netflix documentary Disclosure.
Being out and trans forces people to look back on my work and apply a trans narrative to it because I wasn't making the Matrix films as specifically trans narratives. One of the most striking things to me is the burbling undercurrent of rage that I felt in not being able to be who I was.
I wasn't making the Matrix films as specifically trans narratives. There you go. I don't know how she could have spelled it out any clearer. The allegorical subtext wasn't explicitly intentional. So based on these two key statements from Lily, it's my opinion that the trans subtext and symbolism was subconsciously weaved into the film. That fire Lily mentions and the undercurrent of rage of not being able to be who she was strongly suggests to me that her gender dysphoria and closeted transness, and likely her sisters as well, informed and colored their work with pronounced interests in identity, transformation, and self-actualization. This shouldn't be controversial, right? Like, who you are bleeds into your work, whether you're conscious of it or not. So again, it sucks that all these misleading article titles have given people the oversimplified impression that Lily's gone and said, yep, the Matrix is trans. Always has been, 100% intentional and planned. Despite clear evidence to the contrary, these write-ups are reductively assigning the film only one rigid interpretation. It absolutely goes against how the Wachowskis prefer the Matrix series to be open to interpretation, and diminishes their style of symbolic and metaphorical storytelling, as clunky as that shit got sometimes. So, suffice it to say, the discourse that this little Netflix video sparked has been messy. A lot of people are just ranting and reporting without thorough research, missing all the interesting nuances present. I believe the transgender reading of the film is a fascinating case of new genuine layers being discovered in a film that was subconsciously embedded. Alright, listen, I've got two simple goals for this video. 1. Provide a brief overview of queer-coded cinema, and 2. Explore the transgender reading of The Matrix. Simple, right? So, if that interests you, stick around. It's in my humble opinion that the Matrix film can be read as a queer-coded transgender narrative, and that this makes the film a richer and more unique piece of cinema as a result. Alright, let's get started and rewind back to the 1920s for a brief cinema history lesson about Hollywood censorship.
This means you're going to shed.
Hey, listen, I get it, I do, but trust me, you might learn a few interesting things like I did when I first started researching about this. I'm by no means an expert in queer-coded cinema, so I knew that I'd have to do my homework beforehand, and I'm glad I did. It's given me a deeper appreciation and understanding of the trans reading. Alright, let's talk about the Hays Code. Hollywood in the 20s is developing an image problem. Reports of sleazy criminal scandals are on the rise. As a result, a whole slew of movie censorship bills are being readied by legislators in various states. Feeling the political pressure and dreading the idea of government censorship, movie studio moguls opted to self-regulate in the panicked hopes of rehabilitating Hollywood's waning image. Thus, the Motion Picture Production Code was created, which became better known as the Hays Code, named after the president of the MPPDA at the time, Will H. Hays. Bolstered by the concerns of the Catholic Church, the code was used as a set of moral guidelines that was applied to most US motion pictures released between the early 30s to almost the 70s, with the intent to prohibit motion pictures from lowering the moral standards of audiences by ensuring depictions of the correct standards of life. Their concerns revolved around profanity, homosexuality, interracial romance, and ridicule of the clergy, and also the depictions of criminality and sexuality. You know, pretty much anything they deemed potentially perverse and corrupting.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
The Hays Code censorship gave rise to queer coding. Due to low staff numbers, the people in charge of enforcing the code did a remarkably poor job. Filmmakers at the time came to openly flout the code and stubbornly and creatively bypassed it by conveying their messaging and exploring their interest in subliminal and subtextual ways.
Sure. It's a good-looking gun you're about to use back there. Can I see it? Maybe you'd like to see mine. Nice, awful nice.
Most expressions of homosexuality in most of movies are indirect. And what's interesting about that is that of course is what it was like to express homosexuality in life, that we could only express ourselves indirectly, just as people on the screen could only express themselves indirectly.
This indirectness in filmmaking, while being an artistic constraint, also resulted in arguably better storytelling. Some directors saw the silver lining.
Whereas if we wanted to get something across that was censorable, we couldn't do it openly. We had to do it deviously. We had to be clever, and it usually turned out to be much better than if we had done it straight.
So, because things couldn't be explicit, filmmakers had to adopt a more nuanced approach to their craft. illegal activities and sexuality were conveyed through metaphors and subtext, or suggestive dialogue and subtle performances. Writer Inés Mendoza Perez highlights the irony of the censorship, that while LGBT characters were rarely shown on screen before the Hays Code, the censors caused an influx of heavily coded queer characters from its inception. One particularly interesting example of a classic film with intentional but secret queer subtext is the 1959 historical epic Ben-Hur. In the 1995 documentary The Celluloid Closet, screenwriter Gore Vidal revealed that while assisting with uncredited rewrites on Ben-Hur, he weaved in the implicit notion that Ben-Hur and Messala were ex-lovers. In Vidal's memoir Palimpsest, he recalls expressing his concerns that there seemed to be no motivation for all this fury between Ben-Hur and Messala in the script. Quarreling over politics did not strike him as a dramatically interesting enough reason for these two affectionate childhood friends to abruptly become enemies. Vidal later came up with the idea that Ben-Hur and Messala were boyhood lovers, but Ben-Hur had turned straight as a die, while Messala, the decadent Gentile, had remained in love with Ben and wanted to take up where they had left off. When Ben-Hur rebuffs Messala's advances, a deep and abiding hatred fills Messala to the brim. Director William Wyler conceded that anything is better than what we've currently got, and Stephen Boyd was reportedly receptive with the direction to play Messala as Ben-Hur's vindictive ex-lover, while actor Charlton Heston was completely kept in the dark. Vidal had to convince Wyler at first though, who was reportedly hesitant about there being anything overtly homosexual on screen.
And I said, well, I'll never use the word. There'll be nothing overt. But it'll be perfectly clear that Messala is in love with Ben-Hur. And Stephen Boyd is acting it to pieces. There are looks that he gives him that are just so clear.
I said I'd come back. I never thought you would. Look at you. Look at you.
So, Ben-Hur is an example of stealthy, intentional queer coding, taking form in a cryptic love scene and the villain being motivated by unreciprocated love. For an unintentional example, let's look at another Hollywood classic, the 1955 drama Rebel Without a Cause.
If I had one day when I didn't have to be all confused, I didn't have to feel that I was ashamed of everything, if I felt that I belonged someplace.
Despite the filmmakers not having explicit intentions to do so, queer themes in their work arose because of how audiences naturally infer meaning from some of the more suggestive ambiguities in the film, particularly with the character of John Plato Crawford.
Hey, you want to come home with me? I mean, there's nobody home at my house. Heck, I'm not tired. Are you? See, I don't have too many people I can talk to. Who has?
Screenwriter Stuart Stern had this to say: "People talk about whether that was a homosexual relationship. The intention wasn't that, but any film is at the same time an expression of a writer, and it's an offering to an audience to create their own film. Rebel was about tenderness, intimacy. It was an attempt to widen the permission to love when men were supposed to be one way with each other." It was fascinating to realize just how many notable and unexpected films were queer-coded or open to queer reading. I quickly grew to appreciate this fact and the rebellious efforts of those sly filmmakers. Queer representation on screen, even the coded kind, is always a win. It's always a positive thing. Oh shit, nope, sorry, I was wrong, there are bad kinds. Writer Trisha Enos explains that queer coding in and of itself is neither positive or negative, but likens it to a tool, and notes that the way that tool is applied determines its positive or negative effects. We've discussed the beneficial effects of it being used in well-meaning ways, which helped broaden queer representation in film through stealthy, restricted means, but we've yet to talk about how others had used queer coding to harmfully reinforce regressive, discriminatory ideas. Unfortunately, a lot of the hurtful stereotypes that endure today about queer people have clear roots in these ignorant and unflattering film depictions, in which effeminate and flamboyant queer men were mocked for not being traditionally masculine, and queer women were criticized for lacking traditionally feminine traits and even depicted as predatory.
Why are you looking at me that way? Won't I do? Yes, you'll do very well indeed. Do you like jewels, Lily? This is very old and very beautiful. I think I'll go if you don't mind. Please don't come any closer.
Since film's silent beginnings, jokes that were homophobic and transphobic were common practice, to poke fun at and ridicule the existence of queer characters. These kinds of jokes sure as hell didn't go anywhere.
She is suffering from the worst case of hemorrhoids I have ever seen! That's why Roger Podacter is dead! He found Captain Winky!
your sperm come from?
From my balls.
Hold on, back up.
What are you? Hey, you in Bangkok, sweetie. There's a reason they don't call them
Are you like a male model or a female model?
All is all.
I think he's asking, do you have a hot dog or a bun?
And when not the butt of jokes, queer traits were given to characters that the audience were meant to mistrust or dislike. So while yes, depictions of queer characters were censored and avoided, depictions of them in a negative light were allowed. This is evidenced by how many movie villains were codified as queer, perhaps in an effort to code otherness as something to despise, fight against, and aim to destroy, as Mendoza Perez suggests. Like, even a few animated Disney villains are also notably queer-coded. Think about it. A lot of the male villains intended to be more flamboyant and effeminate when compared to their more traditionally masculine, heroic protagonists, right? And The Little Mermaid's evil Ursula was literally modeled after the drag queen Divine. Queerness was also demonized as a mental illness. This was quite present in many other queer-coded villains whose crimes seemed to stem from their sexually deviant natures or refusal to adhere to cisgender norms. This was not unnoticed by the Matrix co-director Lana Wachowski, who recalls these dehumanizing depictions of transgender people.
I'm someone who thinks about the power of cinema a lot. I experienced it when I was young, and I saw transgender characters in films or in television shows, and they were inherently tragic, or they were a joke or a victim, or most typically, psychopathic serial killers. Those kind of characters reflect the dominant narrative in our culture about difference. Difference is something to fear. Difference is something to laugh at. Difference, most importantly, is something that divides.
So, let's recap. Hollywood had a censorship crackdown in the 30s, and anything not fitting in their heteronormative paradigm was to be censored. Filmmakers said screw that and queer-coded their stories, sometimes to good effect by hinting at the broad gender and sexual diversity of real life, and other times to bad effect by reinforcing offensive stereotypes and depicting queerness as immoral and wrong. Sometimes the queer coding was purposeful and intentional, other times it was more incidental and a product of audiences projecting and reading into a film. And this leads us back to The Matrix, and whether or not the transgender subtext was intentional or unintentional. Like I said earlier, I believe it was subconsciously intentional, so kind of a mix of both intentional and unintentional coding. And please again recall the two main pieces of primary evidence that I'm basing my opinion on. I'm inclined to think that the trans subtext and symbolism naturally arose from the Wachowskis' closeted transness, and much of the supplemental paratext I'll bring up later in my analysis reinforces this. The story that they've crafted is rich and symbolically malleable enough to support the compelling queer readings viewers have extrapolated. The film's narrative about the desire for transformation and rebelling against some sort of systemic oppression is suggestive and broad enough to support and fit various interpretations. The thematic takeaways of the film will vary depending on the person you are and the perspective you're analyzing it from. It's partly why the film's ideas resonate with so many different people, including, unfortunately, the alt-right and men's rights activists. So yeah, a lot of douchebags also like the movie. At its core, the film urges us to question our physical, ideological, and political realities, to be wary and skeptical of authority. It's a cautionary tale about not becoming submissive batteries complicit in fueling invisible systems of oppression and conformity. Yes, it's about Keanu Reeves kung fu fighting evil robots, but beyond the cyberpunk surface level, its themes and ideas can be read into politically, philosophically, theologically, racially, and yes, the film can be read as an allegorical transgender story. I think it needs to be noted just how significant it is that Lily and Lana have chosen to speak out after spending most of their filmmaking careers in silent obscurity. The Wachowskis, more than any other mainstream filmmakers that I can think of, have been the most tight-lipped about their work. Personally, it was part of their mystique to me. Prior to their coming out back in 2010 for Lana and 2016 for Lily, both filmmakers were notoriously reclusive, practically never seen doing press junkets and promotion for the Matrix films. This was because they valued their anonymity and found the whole talking about their art to reporters thing frustratingly tedious. But more interestingly, their opting out of the conversation was a decision to give audiences more freedom in their interpretive discourse about the films. Explaining what the Matrix films personally meant to them led to other people becoming less likely to offer their own interpretations, and so the Wachowskis chose to stop discussing them. So again, it's significant that they've chosen to be more vocal and visible in recent years, and their comments about some of the artistic intentions behind the Matrix are pretty fascinating to hear out. And I personally just really admire how they've given up parts of their private lives in the hopes of encouraging other transgender artists through their visibility.
I am here because when I was young, I wanted very badly to be a writer. I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I couldn't find anyone like me in the world, and it felt that my dreams were foreclosed simply because my gender was less typical than others. If I can be that person for someone else, then the sacrifice of my private civic life may have value.
As the most successful trans filmmakers in the world today, I believe there's a lot to be gained by analyzing the Wachowskis' most popular and successful film, when equipped with a critical lens focused on examining their subtextual exploration of gender and identity.
There's a critical eye being cast back on Lana's and my work through the lens of our transness. This is a cool thing, because it's an excellent reminder that art is never static.
I think this is a testament to the enduring quality of the film, that it reminds us how subjective and evolving cinema can be. I agree with Lily's views on art not being static. It can change and morph as much as we are willing to change and morph. And it's just pretty cool that this movie, despite its admittedly diverse set of problems being a violent male power fantasy, a bit gun fetishist, not passing the Bechdel test, and perpetuating the tired white savior trope, can still manage to be read as an empowering and exciting exploration of the transgender experience. Alright, we're at the meaty center of the video now, where I'm finally going to break down the film for you. If you're still here, thank you, you wonderful patient human being you. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to recount the film beat by beat and handhold you through each instance of transgender symbolism or subtext present in the film. I've yet to see anyone else break down the film in this very chronological way, so let's give it a try. This will primarily be a curated mix of interpretations and analyses that I found during my research, which I feel are the strongest pieces of evidence of the trans reading. So, without further ado, do you want to know how The Matrix is a transgender story?
Show me.
Bam. Even before the 1 minute mark, some notable text appears. It spells out call trans opt. The same text pops up again at the film's end. This feels like just a fun little coincidence to me, but it's worth pointing out. The movie kicks off with a mysterious leather-clad woman taking out a room full of cops. She's then pursued by more cops and an ominous government agent in a physically impossible rooftop chase. But as the chase winds down, a truck seemingly rams her. But wait, she's escaped. How? Not sure. Who are they? No idea. Where's this all going? No clue. We first meet our protagonist of the film alone, asleep at his desk in his dark, messy apartment. This is Thomas Anderson, aka Neo, which is his preferred online hacker alias. He's awoken by messages on his computer giving him mysterious instructions. He obeys and tags along with this group to a dingy little nightclub where he shyly keeps to himself. This is where he meets Trinity, the hacker behind the computer messages and the badass from the start of the film. They have a notable exchange.
My name is Trinity.
The Trinity? That cracked the IRSD base.
That was a long time ago.
Jesus.
What?
I just thought, you were a guy.
Most guys do.
In her essay, Welcome to the Sexual Spectacle, the female heroes of the franchise, writer Martina Lipp notes how this exchange
challenges the widespread characterization of the hacker culture as almost exclusively white, masculine, and middle class, and, in addition, profoundly chauvinistic.
Neo's assumptions of Trinity's gender is therefore reflective of the societal misconceptions placed on what women are capable of. And it's not the first instance the film highlights this typical sexist mode of thinking.
I think we can handle one little girl.
She tells Neo that she knows he's lonely and unhappy.
I know why you hardly sleep, why you live alone, and why night after night you sit at your computer.
From the brief glimpse we've had at Neo's life, it seems she's right. And as to his habit of basically living on his computer, writer Lee Monson made this observation. Safety in public has always been an issue for the trans community, but the advent of the internet allowed for an exploration of self that could exist independently of physical space, and allowed people to connect with others who shared particular needs and experiences. Neo's dissatisfaction with his life is reinforced the next morning when he wakes up late for work, is lectured by his boss, and finds himself sitting in his dull little office cubicle spaced out. A delivery man appears and asks if he's Thomas Anderson. It's an innocent enough question, but pay particular attention to the reluctant, resigned tone he answers in.
Thomas Anderson?
Yeah, that's me.
His flat, detached answer almost sounds like he wishes that he wasn't Thomas Anderson. I know it's a bit of a stretch, but let's lean into it. Neo's relationship with his name is quite an interesting and crucial aspect of the trans reading, so keep that in mind. Let's put a pin in it. It's not too hard to view Neo as a person struggling with gender dysphoria. He's isolated, unhappy with his life, and has a preference to withdraw into online spaces with a different name. Neo gets a surprise call from Morpheus, a mysterious man he's been trying to contact since the start of the film. Morpheus warns Neo that authorities are closing in on him and will take him into custody. He presents Neo with a dangerous escape route, but he chickens out. you know what, shit, fair enough. And is taken away by the agents, who, let's quickly point out, are very heteronormative looking straight-laced white dudes. While detaining Neo, the cold, menacing Agent Smith, played by Hugo Weaving, yes, this Hugo Weaving, drops some of the most telling and potent lines of dialogue when analysed through a queer-coded lens.
It seems that you've been living two lives.
Neo is indeed living two separate lives, with a clear preference for the secret online one as Neo.
One of these lives has a future, and one of them does not.
If we read these two lives as being Thomas, the cis-normative male computer programmer, and Neo, the closeted transgender online identity, it's clear which life Smith believes doesn't have a future. You see, the systemic discrimination faced by the transgender community worldwide is horrendous, often resulting in a lower quality standard of life. Social and legal discrimination heavily affects their opportunities and access to employment, housing, healthcare, legal protection, and other living necessities. These problems are compounded by a shocking frequency of transphobic harassment and violence. Trans women of color are particularly targeted as victims of hate crime. Issues like suicide ideation, self-harm, and depression are also alarmingly more frequent for members of the trans community. And these are just the distressing statistics in Australia for early 2020. I can't even imagine how much more difficult it would have been to be a trans person back in the 90s. As the scene progresses, shit gets weird. Neo demands his right to a phone call, to which Smith replies,
Tell me, Mr. Anderson, what good is a phone call if you're unable to speak?
And then Neo's mouth melts away, his voice of dissent rendered mute and powerless, much like the way in which trans voices are kept out of mainstream conversations, marginalized and ignored at large by the ignorant, indifferent, or hostile masses. The scene continues, and Smith slips a little robot squid tracker into Neo's belly button, because sure, why not? But let's rewind a bit and take note of an important detail that's going to become a recurring motif in the film. For the entire film, Smith only ever addresses Neo by Mr. Anderson, with particular emphasis on the male pronoun.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson. Goodbye, Mr. Anderson.
It's pretty clear how this can be interpreted as Agent Smith dead-naming Neo. Dead-naming is when a person refers to a transgender person by the name they used before having transitioned. As you can imagine, this can be very disparaging and hurtful, to have your new identity invalidated, especially when it's slung as an intentionally dismissive insult. This very much feels like what Smith is doing when he relentlessly calls Neo Mr. Anderson throughout the film. In fact, this culminates in a powerful moment towards the end of the film at the climax of an important fight scene, but we'll get there in due time. Let's get back on track. Back to the belly button squid bot. Neo abruptly wakes up, and before he even has enough time to process what the hell just happened to him, he gets another call from Morpheus, who sends instructions on how to meet. Neo's picked up by Trinity and her crew. The most anxious amongst them, wielding a gun in Neo's face, is Switch, who was written to be played and depicted by two actors, one male, one female. The idea was that in the real world he'd be a man, but in the digital realm of the Matrix, he'd adopt a female avatar, the mental projection of their digital self. The movie studio, however, reportedly felt that having Switch be played by a man and a woman would be unpalatable, or at least too confusing for mainstream audiences, and so Switch was cast as a woman, styled to appear androgynous with her short hair and unique white costuming. The fact that the Wachowskis wanted Switch to be this dual identity character in the film is clear evidence that they had some conscious desire to explore and challenge gender norms, but as Lily recounts it in the Netflix video, this was not an element that Warner Brothers was keen to include in the film.
At a corporate level, the corporate world wasn't ready for it, so...
After the gang removed Neo's bellybutton squidbot, he's taken to meet Morpheus. In their dramatic first meeting, we notice that Morpheus never addresses Neo as Thomas Anderson, a welcome and comforting change of pace when compared to Agent Smith.
Welcome, Neo.
Morpheus also interestingly compares Neo to Alice from Alice in Wonderland.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole.
And soon after, Cypher calls Neo Dorothy in reference to The Wizard of Oz.
It means buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
Keanu Reeves, our action hero leading man, is compared to two classic female protagonists. The allusions are appropriate. Neo will soon also be embarking on a wild, fantastic, otherworldly journey of his own, but the comparison to female protagonists is interesting nonetheless. Even Neo continues the comparison, calling back to his role as Dorothy later in the movie.
Mr. Wizard! Get me the hell out of here!
Alright, make sure to strap your queer-coded lenses firmly on for the rest of this dialogue exchange, because the subtext here gets pretty juicy. It's a very loaded and significant conversation.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me.
Every sentence rings with alternative meaning, and the trans reading becomes more transparent. Neo is analogous of a transgender person who's yet to transition, maybe not yet even aware of his transness. And here's Morpheus and his crew, who've already escaped the gender constructs Neo is trapped in. They're offering Neo help, with Morpheus specifically extending guidance and support, suggesting to Neo and to us that Neo's gender dysphoria is the splinter in his mind. This scene then ramps up to Morpheus giving Neo an ultimatum in the form of 2 pills, one red and one blue. The blue pill being an exit to avoid further introspection and to decline the truth, the red pill being an acceptance to learn the truth which will change the course of his life. Many have already remarked on the red pill's similarity to the real-life red estrogen tablets commonly taken at the time as a testosterone suppressant for transgender women. Side note, the red pill and its symbolic connotations of waking up to the truth has been co-opted by so many different idiots over the years, from right-wing conservatives to big pharma conspiracy nuts, incels, pickup artists, manhood gurus, and maybe most ironically, men's rights activists. The idea that a bunch of super straight toxic anti-feminists appropriating a symbol devised by 2 trans women is equal parts funny and frustrating. Anyway, accepting the red pill, Neo is then ushered out of the room and sat beside a mirror as Morpheus's crew begin work. Neo stares at the broken mirror reflecting his distorted image back at him. It then magically mends, piecing together Neo's fractured reflection into a singular cohesive whole. That can be a pretty nifty symbol if you ask me, of wanting one's fractured sense of identity to harmonize and heal. YouTuber Kenzie Lettuce makes an interesting point about this scene, remarking upon the relationship trans people have with mirrors.
Let me tell you, trans people often have an odd relationship with mirrors. Mirrors are a reflection of the person's self, and for trans people, they can highlight the gulf between what one sees and how one feels. And really, reflections are all over the Matrix, typically at pivotal points in the movie.
In this light, Neo being covered in the reflective mirror substance can be read as that gulf being reduced, with Neo and the mirror literally matching and becoming one another. His fusing with his reflection also nicely marks the beginning of his journey of transformation and gender reassignment. It's a pretty scary moment for Neo, and that fear of coming out and beginning your transition is likely familiar to the Wachowskis.
For years, I couldn't even say the words transgendered or transsexual. When I began to admit it to myself, I knew I would eventually have to tell my parents and my brother and my sisters. This fact would inject such terror into me that I would not sleep for days.
It's pretty easy to view this creepy mirror as a visually intense, symbolic rendering of that terror, that fear. The film's other notable elements of body horror, being pursued, and of hiding are also possibly rooted in the same fear. Alright, time for the movie to drop some big revelations. Neo wakes up in a nightmarish future where humans are farmed for energy by machines in terrifying power plants. He's promptly flushed out of his nasty womb-like pod and is rescued by Morpheus's crew, who are on board the Nebuchadnezzar, a rusty, worn-out hovercraft. An undisclosed amount of time passes while the crew help mend and repair Neo's weak, emaciated body. Viewing this through our trans lens though, it's obvious that this scene can represent the medical gender reassignment procedures undergone by some trans people to surgically and cosmetically alter their bodies. Neo is then eventually shown the truth about the Matrix, that it is a computer-generated dream world used to invisibly imprison the human race. And naturally it's a lot to take in. The Matrix simulation is such a brilliantly simple yet potent and flexible metaphor. Depending on your subjective viewpoint, it can be a metaphorical stand-in for any form of systemic oppression. Maybe it's a political construct that keeps us comfortably ignorant, maybe it's a religious dogmatic prison, or maybe it's a coded critique of racial inequality. The main people of color in the film are the rebels outside of the Matrix who protest and fight for systemic change, and who are never visibly within Neo's very white world prior to his escape. But for our transgender reading, we'll interpret the Matrix as the rigid, archaic gender binary, constructed to assign people a sex that maintains the cisnormative status quo. Are you a male or female? A 1 or a 0?
That sounds exactly like the thinking of a machine to me.
Neo later asks Morpheus if he can return to his normal life in the Matrix simulation. Morpheus answers no, but if you could, would you really want to? Neo wouldn't, because he values authenticity and truth over comfortable, blissful ignorance. But not everyone shares these ideals. More on this asshole later. Morpheus then explains a rule that his crew tried to abide by.
We never free a mind once it's reached a certain age. It's dangerous. The mind has trouble letting go.
This appears to have parallels with how some people may find it more difficult later in life to transition, or maybe it's a critique of that very assumption. Dr. Eleanor Lockhart interestingly posits that Neo being older than the average person awakened is almost certainly a reference to the toxic narrative among trans women that you're a late transitioner if you haven't figured it out by 11 or so. And then Morpheus casually drops the newsflash on Neo that he might be a prophesized Christ-like savior, the chosen one who's destined to destroy the Matrix and free all the enslaved humans. Yeah, cool, no pressure. Neo gets trained up in martial arts by downloading all the martial arts into his brain, has a sparring match with Morpheus, ends up falling off a skyscraper, and learns about the deadly dangerous sentinels that patrol the real world, and the deadly dangerous agents that police the Matrix. The agents are an ingenious set of villains devised by the Wachowskis. Writer Andrea Long Chu views the agents as transphobia personified, relentless enforcers of the strict heteronormative status quo.
You see an agent, you do what we do. Run. You run your ass off.
The fact that agents can take over anyone's body who's still a battery plugged into the Matrix is terrifying. Their ability to immediately take control over random people illustrates how any stranger in the street could potentially harbor hostility and violence against trans people. Writer Jennifer Harrison recognizes the anxiety of maybe encountering violent transphobes when walking down a busy street as an openly trans person. She says that,
until they actually attack, they look just like everyone else. They blend in. When you walk through a sea of people, you have no idea who could really be filled with that hatred, so you have to be ultra vigilant around everyone. You don't know who could be an agent.
Look again. Freeze it. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one.
In a written piece she contributed to for the Windy City Times back in 2016, Lily Wachowski asserts that
being transgender is not easy. We live in a majority-enforced, gender-binary world. This means when you're transgender, you have to face the hard reality of living the rest of your life in a world that is openly hostile to you.
And that is a fitting adjective to describe the world of the Matrix: hostile. Our heroes travel through the Matrix on high alert, hyper-aware of the potential and imminent dangers around them. The sharply suited agents, who are vividly emblematic of maleness in their evocative Secret Service attire, are reminders to be suspicious of authority figures. But good old shifty Cypher chooses to ignore this important fact about the deceptive agents. A few scenes later, we learn that he's secretly in contact with Agent Smith and has brokered a deal to have his memory wiped before being reinserted into the Matrix as a rich, famous actor. It makes sense to read Cypher as a person who regrets his choice to transition. If that's the case, it seems to portray detransitioners rather negatively. If we leap ahead a bit in the film, Cypher ends up murdering his fellow crew members and sells out Morpheus to the agents to torture, in order to extract access codes to humanity's last city, Zion. Cypher's basically chosen to betray all of his fellow Matrix escapees, aka his surrogate trans family, in order to return to his pre-transitioned life, with the added promises of wealth and fame. He's portrayed as a Judas, a selfish traitor. Again, reading Cypher as a blanket critique of anyone who wants or has detransitioned feels too simplistic and hateful to me. I think it's more appropriate to read him as someone who's unhealthily trying to repress his transness, and that repression of his true self is manifesting into resentment and indifference towards other trans or queer people.
Cypher represents someone who has given in to the fear that comes from learning the truth, who would rather the truth be erased from their mind than engage with it.
His inability to accept himself and the true state of things are reflected by his discomfort and frustration with the bleak real-world setting.
I'm tired, Trinity. I'm tired of this war. Tired of fighting. I'm tired of this ship being cold, of eating the same goddamn goop every day.
Furthermore, this repression makes him susceptible to being exploited by the cis-normative agents. In this regard, the character of Cypher is almost cautionary in our trans reading. Writer Jennifer Harrison sharply highlights this exploitation when she writes that the most striking parallel with Cypher's story in our world is that many people who detransition are used by transphobes in order to attack trans people further. People who detransition are seen as proof that there's something wrong with being transgender, or that society is forcing people to transition when they clearly don't need to. Lo and behold, the agents use Cypher's detransition back into the Matrix to get to the heroes. They capitalize on his struggle. They appear as his allies, but ultimately use him to deal a blow to the community he wishes to leave. We're watching real life play out on the Nebuchadnezzar. Journalist and filmmaker Ugla Stefania similarly shuns how transition regret is exploited for transphobic causes, stressing that it should never be used to advocate against healthcare that has benefited the lives of thousands of people, and that medically transitioning is life-saving for some transgender people. Stefania also points out that there will always be the risk of regret with any surgery, and lists possible valid reasons for the regret that have more to do with the social rejection and discrimination faced when coming out as trans, or realizing that they are non-binary as opposed to trans, or the fact that sometimes the results of surgeries are simply unsatisfactory. Alright, where were we? Here. Morpheus believes it's time to take Neo to see the Oracle. Cypher alerts the agents of their location. Neo meets the Oracle, who examines him and gives him some disappointing news.
I'm not the one.
He's a nobody. She then warns him that Morpheus is so blind in his belief in Neo that he will sacrifice himself to save him. She also adds this.
You know what that means? It's Latin. Means know thyself. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Being the one is just like being in love. No one can tell you you're in love, you just know it. Through and through, balls to bones.
I imagine it's much the same for queer and trans people. No one can tell you these things.
Neo's journey is a very personal one. He's constantly told, by his allies anyway, that the path he takes is truly his and his alone. The Oracle can't tell him he's the one, it's something he has to discover for himself. I can tell you that's very similar to what it's like coming out as gay, and I have to imagine it's the case for people who are trans. It's not something that someone else can decide for you. You have to take that step yourself.
En route to exiting the Matrix, the crew is ambushed by authorities and Agent Smith, who manage to capture Morpheus. The rest of the crew are picked off by Cypher, who exits first. He murders Dozer, APOC, and Switch, but is fortunately stopped by Tank. The agents begin to interrogate Morpheus, and there's this interesting beat with Smith when his calm civility erodes. He desperately confesses to wanting to exit the Matrix to avoid infection from humanity. It rings with homophobic and transphobic undertones. Dr. Eleanor Lockhart might agree, noting that Agent Smith has repeatedly expressed his terror of infection with humanity, or we might say queerness.
I can taste your stink. Every time I do, I fear that I've somehow been infected by it. It's repulsive, isn't it?
Tank suggests that they sacrifice Morpheus before the agents can break him and acquire the codes to Zion. They can do this by unplugging him right there and then. Neo recalls the Oracle's prediction and decides to take fate into his own hands, mounting a rescue mission with Trinity and Tank. And there's this great little beat when Trinity flexes her rank and puts Neo in his place.
What are you doing?
Going with you.
No, you're not.
No? Let me tell you what I believe. I believe Morpheus means more to me than he does to you. I believe if you are really serious about saving him, you are going to need my help. And since I am the ranking officer on this ship, if you don't like it, I believe you can go to hell, because you aren't going anywhere else. Tank, load us up.
They ambush the government building Morpheus is being kept in, with guns blazing. They blow past the military guards. They do some pretty cool limbo. They take out some agents. And they come to Morpheus' rescue in glorious action-packed fashion. Morpheus and Trinity successfully exit the Matrix, but Agent Smith manages to trap Neo. They face off, and despite his best efforts, Neo is pummeled. As a train can be heard approaching, Agent Smith puts Neo into a headlock and dead names him again.
You hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. It is the sound of your death.
As the train bears towards them, the dire moment seems to starkly illustrate the overwhelming adversity and danger innocent trans people often face. The train bearing down on Neo carries with it more significance than any viewer prior to 2012 could have realized. Lana, during an awards acceptance speech in 2012, recounted how her struggles with gender dysphoria almost led her to commit suicide during her teens. She had written a letter to her parents before preparing to jump in front of a Chicago subway train. Luckily, a stranger appeared on the platform and locked eyes with Lana, which caused her to abandon her plan. As the train draws closer, Neo channels the last of his strength and rejects Smith's dead naming. It's a stirring moment of defiance and relief, made all the more powerful now in light of Lana's saddening and revealing confession. Viewing Agent Smith as the voice of conformism, dysphoria, non-transitioning, Dr. Eleanor Lockhart aptly describes Neo's climactic victory as the blessed decision to tell that voice to go fuck itself. She, like many others, have read the moment as a transcendent affirmation of a chosen identity, and bluntly as a metaphor for transition.
Yeah, come on. Who's not in the fucking standing in the aisles at that point?
Neo runs like hell to the nearest available phone exit when Sentinels attack the Nebuchadnezzar. Our gang load up their EMP to fry the Sentinels, but can't use it until Neo is safely out of the Matrix. Neo finally reaches the room with the phone, but Smith is already there waiting, and our hero is shot point blank and dies. Trinity, in a reverse Sleeping Beauty trope, revives Neo with the power of love. Neo gets back to his feet and softly declares no, and is able to stop the rain of incoming bullets. Now reborn, he can see through the artifice, the coding of the Matrix. He is now the One, finally a unified and self-actualized whole. Neo then effortlessly defeats Smith and destroys him by entering his enemy and obliterating him from within. Dr. Eleanor Lockhart interprets this moment as Smith having been queered in some way by Neo's influence, and notes how the other agents act creeped out by him in an explicitly homophobic way. Neo exits the Matrix and Morpheus blasts the EMP just in the nick of time, stopping the Sentinels. Note the second appearance of trans call Opt, which again neatly opened the film. We hear Neo speaking over the phone, announcing his ambitious plans for the future, to show the people trapped within the Matrix a world beyond what they've known, beyond the restrictive gender constructs that they've been indoctrinated into. He wants to expand their perception and inspire change.
I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
Note how the camera pushes forwards, straight in between an M and an F, between the gender binaries of male and female, and into the exciting unknown space between, where all the complex and diverse multitudes of sexuality and gender identification lie. Neo's final line then ends on a hopeful note.
Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
It's an invitation for the machines, analogues of our oppressive cis-normative society, to grow up and broaden its mechanical binary thinking. After hanging up the phone and exiting the booth, he pops on a slick pair of shades, looks upwards, before flying past the camera. Now, just as the camera widens out to reveal that last final shot of the city, let's take a final wide macro look at the film and examine its title. What does the word Matrix even mean? A quick Google search tells us that it means the cultural, social, or political environment in which something develops. It almost sounds like a chrysalis, which means a transitional state, like the stage before a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. The word chrysalis also happens to appear at the end of the Matrix shooting script dated March 29th, 1998. In this version of the script, Neo's final voiceover is phrased differently to how it is in the finished film, but the strong hint of queer subtext is still present, if not more so. Neo says the following: "I believe deep down we both want this world to change. I believe that the Matrix can remain our cage, or it can become our chrysalis. That's what you helped me to understand. That to be free, you cannot change your cage. You have to change yourself."
Cool. Human chrysalis and whatnot.
Alright, now that I've shown you how deep the rabbit hole goes, I hope you're convinced that the Matrix does have potent transgender subtext running through it. I hope that the ample queer-coded metaphors, themes, and subtext in the film that I've walked you through, and the wealth of great articles and analyses I pulled from, have helped convince you, and that you now genuinely believe that The Matrix can be interpreted as a uniquely coded story about the transgender experience.
You've made a believer out of me.
If you enjoyed the video and my particular brand of long rambling, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to hear what you think of the trans reading, so sound off below in the comments. Alright, thanks so much for watching. I'm Dave, and I talk too much.